Today we take a look at 6 selfies captured seconds before tragedy. From a crane operator ignoring safety warnings high above Dubai's skyline, to a dog walker losing his balance near a busy intersection, ending in a shocking disaster for everyone watching. It was April 14, 2018. The construction site for a luxury residential tower in Dubai stretched skyward through the morning heat, tower cranes dominating the skyline like mechanical sentinels. The temperature had already climbed to 89 degrees by noon, and Ahmed Al Farouk stood at the base of Crane 7, staring upward at the operator's cab 180 feet above ground level. Ahmed was 28 years old, recently promoted from general laborer to crane operator trainee at a major construction firm specializing in high-rise development. Born in Alexandria, Egypt, he'd moved to Dubai 3 years earlier, sending most of his earnings home to support his widowed mother and 2 younger sisters. Colleagues described him as ambitious and eager to prove himself, sometimes to the point of recklessness. He'd only completed 2 weeks of crane operation training and had never climbed this particular model before. Tower cranes are massive vertical structures featuring a horizontal jib that can reach over 250 feet. With operator cabs accessed by internal ladders requiring safety harnesses and strict protocols designed to prevent falls from extreme heights where survival is virtually impossible. Ahmed had spent his lunch break boasting to co-workers about his new position, showing off photos from earlier training sessions. They said that the promotional pay increase meant better support for his family, and he wanted documentation of his achievement to send home. His supervisor had left the site for a meeting, and the crane's day operator had descended for lunch, leaving the cab secured but the access ladder unlocked under lax site practices. At approximately 1:15 in the afternoon, Ahmed entered through a safety gate that had been left propped open for convenience under lax site practices. He ignored posted warnings requiring harness systems and buddy protocols for all climbs. The internal ladder was narrow, with rungs spaced 12 inches apart, meaning the 180-foot ascent required roughly 180 rungs and took about 8 minutes at a steady pace. 3 co-workers noticed him starting the ascent and shouted warnings from below, but Ahmed waved dismissively and continued upward. Wind speeds had picked up to 18 miles per hour, causing the crane structure to sway slightly, and morning condensation had left metal surfaces slick despite the heat. Ahmed reached the operator's cab and immediately set his phone to a 10-second timer according to his digital footprint, positioning it on the control panel and bracing it in place with his folded jacket. He stepped onto a horizontal maintenance beam extending from the cab's exterior, a narrow platform meant only for secured workers performing repairs. He took the picture. Seconds later, a corroded support bracket at the beam's welded joint failed without warning, weakened by coastal humidity and long-term maintenance neglect, producing a sharp crack audible to workers 60 feet below. He dropped straight down, arms flailing uselessly. His body struck a diagonal support beam at 40 feet, spinning him violently before he continued falling. He landed head first on a concrete foundation slab, the impact producing a heavy, blunt sound witnesses later described as unmistakable. 2 laborers reached Ahmed within 30 seconds of the fall. One called emergency services while the other attempted to check for vital signs without moving the body. Paramedics arrived 11 minutes later but only pronounced him dead at the scene. The subsequent autopsy listed unsurvivable blunt force trauma to the head and neck, cervical spine disruption, multiple fractures, and extensive internal hemorrhage. Deep abrasions along his right side indicated sliding contact with crane components during the fall. Site investigators recovered Ahmed's phone. The image showed him smiling, with metadata confirming the photo was saved 4 seconds before the structural failure. The construction firm suspended all crane operations for mandatory safety inspections, discovering similar corrosion on 3 other units. Ahmed's family received a settlement from the company and the beam manufacturer. It was October 9th, 2015. The afternoon air near a roadside elephant sanctuary outside Chiang Mai was thick with humidity and exhaust fumes from passing motorbikes. Mark Lewis, a 33-year-old IT consultant from Manchester, stood near the sanctuary's fence, watching an Asian elephant sway rhythmically while tourists snapped photos from the designated viewing area. Mark wasn't a novice traveler. He'd spent the past 5 years documenting his trips across Southeast Asia for a modest travel blog that attracted a few thousand followers. His Instagram profile featured dozens of close-up animal photos, feeding monkeys in Bali, posing with snakes in Cambodia, hand-feeding stingrays in Thailand. However, He'd been reprimanded twice at other wildlife facilities for crossing barriers. Elephant tourism in Thailand operates in a gray area between conservation and exploitation. Many roadside sanctuaries house retired logging elephants or rescued animals kept in semi-captivity, often with limited staffing and inconsistent enforcement of visitor rules. The animals are accustomed to human presence but remain unpredictable, especially when startled by sudden movements or loud noises. Handlers use specific vocal commands and physical cues to maintain control, but these systems depend on visitors respecting clear boundaries. The sanctuary where Mark arrived that afternoon had posted multiple signs in English warning against unauthorized feeding and physical contact, though physical barriers were minimal. That afternoon, Mark purchased a bag of sugarcane chunks from the gift shop, but ignored instructions to feed only from behind the fence, holding it closer to lure the elephant toward his camera. The sanctuary's owner had noticed Mark circling the elephant enclosure twice, phone in hand, clearly calculating angles. Other tourists remained behind the faded yellow line painted onto the dirt, but Mark likely saw an opportunity. The main handler had stepped away to manage a bottleneck at the feeding station for another tour group, leaving the elephant loosely tethered near the fence. Mark ducked under the bamboo railing and approached the elephant's left side. He crouched slightly, extending the sugar cane in his left hand while positioning his phone for a selfie with his right. The elephant, a 38-year-old female named Molly, initially appeared calm. Several witnesses later reported seeing Mark lean closer, nearly touching the elephant's front leg to get both himself and the animal's face in frame. A passing tuk-tuk honked loudly on the adjacent road. The sound triggered an instinctive response. Molly's ears flared outward, her massive body tensed, and her trunk lifted sharply. Mark didn't react quickly enough. Molly flinched forward, her right front leg coming down directly onto Mark's upper torso with a crushing force. Mark collapsed immediately beneath the elephant's foot, his body pinned against the hard-packed dirt. Molly lifted her leg almost immediately and backed away, showing no signs of aggression, her trunk swaying nervously. The sanctuary owner, who had witnessed the incident from the office, sprinted toward Mark while shouting for staff to secure Molly. Several bystanders attempted basic first aid, while handlers pulled Molly farther from the fence. A German tourist called emergency services. The local rescue unit arrived, but Mark was unresponsive when paramedics reached him. They attempted resuscitation while transporting him to a regional hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 3:35 in the afternoon. The medical examiner's report documented massive internal bleeding, 8 fractured ribs on the left side, a punctured lung, severe liver laceration, and crushing injuries to the chest cavity that had caused immediate cardiac arrest. Mark's phone was recovered from beneath Molly's foot. The screen cracked but functional. Thai police secured the device as evidence before later returning it to the family. The final photo showed Mark's face in the lower frame, slightly blurred from movement, with Molly's trunk visible rising in the background. It was March 3rd, 2018. The Chamonix Alps stretched under deceptively calm skies, their slopes blanketed in fresh powder that masked the dangers lurking beneath. Julien Moreau, a 26-year-old semi-professional skier from Lyon, stood mid-slope on an off-piste section marked with warning signs, adjusting his phone for the perfect angle. Julien had been skiing the Alps since childhood, becoming an adrenaline junkie through increasingly risky backcountry stunts. He worked part-time at a regional outdoor equipment retailer, while pursuing sponsorship deals from alpine gear brands. His Instagram featured dozens of shots from restricted zones, each caption bragging about going where others wouldn't dare. Off-piste skiing takes riders beyond groomed resort boundaries into uncontrolled terrain where avalanche risks multiply exponentially. Fresh snowfall creates unstable layers that can release without warning, especially on slopes exceeding 30 degrees. Julien understood these basics, but friends said that he consistently prioritized content over caution, believing his experience would keep him safe. He wore a helmet and insulated jacket but carried no avalanche airbag and no transceiver of his own. That morning, avalanche services had issued a level 4 warning across the Chamonix sector, indicating high danger from recent snowfall and rising temperatures destabilizing the snowpack. Julien likely noticed the warning flags at the trail boundary but continued anyway, telling his friend Mark that the lighting was too perfect to waste. He said that he wanted a selfie with Mont Blanc framed behind him, something dramatic for his followers. Mark, who did carry a transceiver, probe, and shovel, hesitated but followed at a distance. At approximately 11:20 in the morning, Julian stopped mid-descent to set up his shot. He stomped the snow twice with his ski, a crude stability check that revealed nothing about the deeper layers. Small cracks spider-webbed from his skis, an unmistakable sign of slab instability, but he ignored them. Mark called up from about 40 feet below, suggesting they move to safer terrain. Julian waved him off, holding up his phone for one more attempt at the perfect angle. The slab released. A section of snow roughly 150 feet wide fractured along Julien's position, the crack racing across the slope in seconds. He managed one step before the entire face collapsed beneath him, sweeping him downhill in a churning mass of snow and ice. Julian tumbled headfirst, his body tumbling through the debris. Mark watched in horror as his friend disappeared into the white chaos, briefly visible as a dark shape before being swallowed again. The avalanche carried Julian approximately 300 feet downslope before depositing him in a dense debris field, buried under about 4 feet of compacted snow. Mark switched his avalanche beacon to search mode, but no signal appeared since Julian carried no transceiver, forcing him to rely on surface clues and manual digging. He called emergency services, then continued shoveling alone, his arms burning as the snow hardened around his shovel blade. By the time he exposed Julian's torso, his breathing had already stopped. A mountain rescue helicopter arrived within approximately 18 minutes, lowering rescuers onto the debris field. Julian was fully extracted by 11:43 in the morning, but he showed no vital signs and could not be resuscitated. The medical examiner determined Julian died from asphyxiation caused by snow compression around his chest and airways, preventing effective breathing. He also sustained 3 fractured ribs, extensive internal bruising consistent with violent tumbling, and early-stage hypothermia in his extremities. His phone survived intact in his jacket pocket, protected by layers of fabric. The device later powered on briefly during evidence handling, revealing a final photo time-stamped 11:22 in the morning, recovered from the phone's internal metadata, showing Julian smiling with the mountain range behind him. It was July 9th, 2013. The cobblestone streets of Pamplona's bullring section glistened with morning dew and residue from the previous night, creating a slick surface that would prove deadly within the hour. Diego Manuel Morales, 29, worked at a regional insurance firm. His weekends told a different story. Friends described him as someone constantly chasing the next adrenaline rush, posting photos from cliff diving in Mallorca, motorcycle trips through the Pyrenees, and base jumping. He had arrived in Pamplona just 18 hours earlier with 3 college friends, ignoring their suggestions to attend a safety briefing offered by the festival organizers. The running of the bulls involves participants sprinting ahead of 6 fighting bulls, weighing 1,200 to 1,500 pounds each, covering an 875-meter course through narrow streets toward the bull ring. The bulls can reach about 20 to 25 miles per hour on straightaways, and their horns are left unblunted per tradition. Veteran runners stress the importance of constant movement, proper footwear for traction, and never stopping in the bull's direct path. The wooden barriers lining the route are designed with gaps allowing runners to escape, but create deadly pinch points where humans can become trapped against the structure. That morning, Diego positioned himself in the worst possible location, the final stretch before the bull ring entrance, where exhausted bulls often become erratic due to crowd pressure and slick footing. Festival officials had issued warnings about the wet cobblestones creating hazardous conditions. His friends, positioned 15 feet away in the safe spectator zone, shouted at him to move away from the barrier and keep running with the crowd. Diego waved them off, determined to get a photo. The first rocket signaled the bull's release from the corral. Diego kept his phone extended, taking pictures of the oncoming herd with the rear camera before turning it toward himself. He attempted a selfie with the bulls in the background, underestimating their closing speed. His sneakers, designed for gym workouts rather than wet stone surfaces, provided inadequate traction. As he turned to run, his left foot slipped sideways on the moisture-slicked cobblestones. The loss of balance cost him 3 critical seconds. Diego stumbled forward, dropping his phone and reaching for the barrier. The 4th bull in the pack, a 1,400-pound animal running at full speed, was carried forward by the momentum of the herd, striking him from behind with its lowered head and launching him sideways into the wooden fence structure with devastating force. The impact drove Diego's torso into a vertical support post, the collision audible above the crowd noise. His body folded around the wooden beam before striking exposed fence hardware that had been loosened during an earlier surge of runners. Witnesses later described severe abdominal injuries caused by the violent impact against the damaged barrier. Diego's body convulsed once before going still as runners continued streaming past, unable to stop without risking further pileups. His friends immediately screamed for medical assistance. Festival medical teams, stationed every 100 yards, reached Diego in under a minute. Emergency responders found him unresponsive with massive hemorrhaging from multiple penetration sites. He was transported to the medical tent 200 feet away, but pronounced dead at 8:17 in the morning. The autopsy revealed 3 puncture wounds causing organ perforation, specifically the liver and lower intestine, along with severe internal bleeding and blunt force trauma to the spine from the initial fence collision. Festival organizers closed the affected stretch for immediate inspection and removed and replaced the damaged fencing sections that afternoon. Diego's smartphone was later found among debris cleared from the route after the run. The final photo, frozen mid-selfie, captured Diego grinning with the first 3 bulls mere feet behind him. It was August 15th, 2017. The Lake District's Helvellyn Ridge stretched under darkening skies, the afternoon light fading as storm clouds gathered from the west. Sophie Villan, a 24-year-old geology student from Manchester, stood with her partner Lewis Loxley near the summit's metal boundary fence, adjusting her camera settings one final time. Sophie had spent 3 years studying geological formations at a northern university, developing a passion for landscape photography that complemented her academic work. Her social media showed dozens of dramatic weather shots, storm fronts rolling over peaks, lightning illuminating distant valleys. Lewis, a 27-year-old amateur photographer working as a graphic designer, shared her enthusiasm for dramatic conditions. Friends described them as adventurous but generally sensible, though their pursuit of perfect shots sometimes pushed boundaries. The couple had been hiking together for 2 years, gradually attempting more challenging peaks across northern England. They understood basic mountain safety, but had developed a troubling habit of staying out during deteriorating weather for photography opportunities. That afternoon, Sophie and Lewis reached the summit around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Weather forecasts had warned of severe thunderstorms developing after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but the couple decided they had time for photos. The metal fence marking the ridge boundary provided a perfect foreground element for their composition, despite posted warnings about lightning exposure near metal structures. Other hikers on the summit noticed the rapidly approaching storm and began descending immediately. By 3:40 in the afternoon, conditions deteriorated significantly. Thunder rumbled across the valley, growing louder with each roll. The temperature dropped noticeably as wind picked up. 3 separate groups of hikers passed Sophie and Lewis, several calling out warnings about the approaching electrical activity. The couple remained focused on their camera setup, dismissing concerns with waves and assurances they would leave soon. Sophie positioned the camera on a small tripod, setting a 10-second timer. Lewis stood beside her near the metal fence, both soaking wet from light rain that had started minutes earlier. They were less than 7 feet from the fence when Sophie activated the timer. The nearest hikers, now roughly 650 feet down the trail, glanced back as the first lightning bolt struck a peak about half a mile away. The second strike hit seconds later. Lightning connected with an exposed rock formation approximately 100 feet from where Sophie and Lewis stood, producing a powerful ground current and side flash that routed through a poorly bonded section of the wet metal fence. Sophie's left hand rested on a fence post as the surge hit. The current passed through her body in microseconds, inducing immediate cardiac arrest and causing catastrophic internal damage. Lewis was thrown backward by the electrical discharge, suffering minor burns where his jacket touched the fence. He regained consciousness within seconds, finding Sophie collapsed and unresponsive. The hikers who had warned them earlier rushed back up. Once a brief lull in the lightning allowed safe approach, one immediately calling emergency services while others attempted CPR. Mountain rescue teams reached the summit nearly an hour after the strike. Helicopter evacuation was impossible due to continued lightning activity and reduced visibility. Paramedics confirmed Sophie had died instantly. The postmortem examination showed her heart had stopped due to electrically induced cardiac arrest, with superficial burns on her left hand and arm where she contacted the fence, and internal thermal and electrical injuries consistent with a high-energy lightning strike passing through her torso. The camera's memory card survived intact, shielded by the camera body and tripod, and bypassed by the main current path, showing the final photo captured seconds before the strike. Lewis suffered severe psychological trauma and required months of counseling. It was November 22nd, 2018. The afternoon light was fading along a residential street in North London, where terraced houses lined both sides of a moderately busy thoroughfare connecting 2 main intersections. Tom Ashmore, a 31-year-old administrative coordinator at a financial services firm, walked his 2-year-old mixed-breed terrier along the familiar route he took every Sunday after lunch. Tom had adopted the dog 18 months earlier from a local rescue shelter. Co-workers described him as reliable and methodical, someone who color-coded his calendar and never missed deadlines. His Instagram account showed frequent photos with the terrier, usually posed shots in parks or on quiet streets. The dog had completed basic obedience training but had shown unpredictable responses to sudden movements, particularly squirrels and birds. Tom's veterinarian had noted this in medical records during routine checkups, recommending a short, non-retractable leash secured around the wrist and increased vigilance near traffic. That afternoon, Tom stopped approximately 3 feet from the curb to capture a selfie for social media. He positioned himself kneeling on one knee, his weight pitched forward, holding his phone at arm's length while loosely gripping the thin nylon handle of a retractable leash with 2 fingers of his left hand. Traffic flowed steadily eastbound at roughly 28 miles per hour. Several pedestrians walked past on the opposite pavement. Onlookers said that the terrier sat initially calm beside him as Tom adjusted his phone, unaware that a parked delivery van partially blocked his view of oncoming traffic. A gray squirrel burst from a front garden directly across the dog's line of sight. The terrier lunged instantly, yanking the leash loop cleanly from Tom's fingers. Tom's kneeling position offered no stability as he reached desperately for the escaping dog, his free foot failing to find traction on the uneven curb edge. His forward momentum carried him off the curb and directly into the traffic lane in seconds. 2 pedestrians across the street shouted warnings as a silver sedan approached at standard speed, emerging from behind parked vehicles less than 70 feet away. The driver had seconds to react. Tom's body entered the vehicle's path at the exact moment braking would have been effective had the warning come earlier. He fell forward into the lane, striking the pavement face first as the sedan's front bumper made contact almost simultaneously at approximately 24 miles per hour after partial braking. The impact threw him 7 feet forward, his head striking the asphalt. Witnesses heard the collision's hollow thump, and the driver's braking screech followed immediately by a horn blast. Tom's body came to rest partially beneath the sedan's chassis near the front axle. Blood pooled rapidly from head wounds onto the road surface. His right leg bent at an unnatural angle, the femur protruding through torn fabric. The terrier, still attached to its leash, was unharmed 15 feet away, panting and pulling against the taut line. A witness called emergency services. Paramedics arrived, but found Tom unresponsive with absent vital signs. The autopsy confirmed massive skull fracture with brain hemorrhaging, multiple rib fractures causing internal bleeding in the chest cavity, and a compound femur fracture with severe tissue damage. Abrasions covered his face and torso consistent with high-velocity impact against road surface. The injuries were determined to be immediately fatal and incompatible with survival. A Metropolitan Police traffic officer later bagged Tom's phone as evidence from the roadway, its screen cracked but functional. The last photo showed him making faces at the camera, the terrier visible in frame. The local council's dog warden temporarily housed the dog after a microchip and welfare check before Tom's sister assumed ownership 3 weeks later. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.